Okay, so hello and welcome everybody. I am Alanoud Bukhamas, graphic design instructor at the College of Arts and Creative Enterprises at Zayed University, Dubai. I'll be moderating this talk titled Elevating the Media and Communication Landscape with Tariq Atrisi. Hi, Tariq.
Hi.
So Tariq is the founder of Tariq Atrisi Design, a design studio based in Barcelona and the Netherlands. The studio's typographic and cross-cultural design approach produced projects that left a significant influence on the contemporary graphic design landscape in the Middle East and gained Atrisi international recognition. He was listed in 2017 as one of the most influential 100 Lebanese professional figures around the globe. Atrisi's clients include Apple, the V&A Museum in London, BBC, Dubai Television, and Arab Museum of Modern Arts Methaf. Atrisi's lectures internationally about Arabic design and visual culture. He has taught at the American University of Dubai, the Virginia Commonwealth University in Qatar, and the Utrecht School of Arts in the Netherlands. Atrisi founded the Arabic Type Foundry, Arabic typography, designing and developing Arabic and multilingual typefaces for branding needs. Before we start this discussion, I have to say that Tariq's work is often discussed in my own studios, and so it's my personal pleasure to share the stage with you today.
Thank you.
So the flow of today's discussion will start at investigating present-day design, its role in communication and digital media, and then we'll discuss the future of design and what it means to all of us. Tariq, there is so much to talk about. There's so many brands out there. There's so many platforms today. Do you think the world is moving too fast?
Absolutely. The world is absolutely moving too fast for all of us and for all industries. I think for design, this means this generates a lot of challenges. On one hand, the need to keep up with the fast pace of changes and adjusting design practice to respond to these fast changes. On the other hand, design is by definition a slow process. You cannot fast track it. So in order to deliver to such a fast world, it puts the creative process under a lot of pressure. So that makes it very difficult and complicated. Also, it reflects on design education, I have to say. Nowadays, almost everything you teach for first-year students in design is almost obsolete already in the fourth years, especially if you're talking technology or the setups and the platforms that you're designing for. Of course, the core of design education is always the same. And that makes it challenging, and that makes the need to focus on the process of design and the core of design education really a must. And I guess we will talk more about this. But absolutely, that's part of the biggest challenge that we face it in design, in terms of education and in terms of practice as well.
Interesting. I mean, we all know that design can be a means to tell a story, make a statement, communicate, or send a message across. But how we communicate to the general public, I see that there are two sides to this. One side, you have the designer, who are often accused of being elitists. They find themselves addressing only the people who speak the design language and understand their nuanced references. But surely the field can have more value if we communicate to everyone. On the other side, we also have the general public. So in the Arab region, we value communicating with customers. We value PR campaigns. We're starting to understand as well the value of brands. However, more broadly, design is considered a service. So the question is, why don't we hold design for the sake of design at a higher value?
I mean, I think that's an interesting question, and it has a lot of layers as well. I think the fact that design is considered as a service is a core to the problem that we face in design and to all the problems that you mentioned. As the design disciplines progressed, let's say, the designer's role has always came at the end of a process. Someone was conceptualizing, someone who's not a designer was conceptualizing a problem, identifying a problem, conceptualizing a business idea, coming up with a solution, and then involving the designer sort of at the end of this process. So that's how design started to become in the service industry in the wrong way, because the designer found himself at the end of the process not actively playing a role in the creative process and actually coming to sort of package or visualize a product that has been conceptualized by someone else. To me, sort of my approach to design, and that's what was nurtured in me during my education at the School of Visual Arts in New York, the focus was really on design entrepreneurship. So placing the designer at the beginning of this process, giving the designer authorship on the design process. So having him conceptualize a business idea from the start, conceptualizing a business plan, and being involved in not only as a designer, using your design skills sort of at the end as an end to a long process of a business process necessarily, not really entrepreneurial process. In that sense, you blur a little bit that problem, because I think it's a failure from a designer's perspective when you kind of separate this. Design, by definition, you are trying to solve an existing problem in society around us. And when an existing problem is addressing the general public and not only designers. So I think it's easier to design when your target group are only designers. That's not the challenging part. The challenging part is when you're really able to use your communication skills as a designer to reach a wider public. And I think that's a big challenge. And I think that's what a lot of young designers face nowadays, where there is a kind of a shift in their work. And this is the work that I do for a living, which I'm not so passionate about, and this is the work that I do that I'm so passionate about and I have full authorship about it. But it places it more as an artistic practice for self-satisfaction of being able to do the design that you want to do, for communicating within your world. And then really the challenge is, how do you bridge those? How are you able to maintain your passion and your deep understanding of design, but create products that are commercially viable?
Right.
And
so
that's the
how do you
key
bridge it? How have you bridged it in your
for me, the approach of design entrepreneurship has always sort of stamped me, and that's I think what was the result of the education in New York, I think. Of course, on one hand, it happened by setting up my design studio, because that was an approach of an entrepreneurship approach to design, where at the moment I was unhappy with my options. As a young designers, the culture of a small graphic design studio was not existing in our region. My only possibilities was to work in an ad agency, and advertising is completely different than graphic design, so it's something kind of I refused to do, and I found a niche for creating a small graphic design studio that's actually focused on Arabic typography and the Arab market. I think more practically, this translated into how we started developing Arabic fonts and typefaces in our office, because I identified that there is a big lack of Arabic fonts missing, and this is a product that I wanted to create. And I didn't also want to wait for a client to come and tell me, we need an Arabic font that needs to look this and this and this. We sort of liberated ourselves from that context, setup, and started to define ourselves. What are the fonts needed? What's the quality of fonts that we need? What's the personality of this Arabic font or bilingual font that we need? Doing it, designing it, preparing it for the market, again, to be a commercial viable product that will have a life in the market. So in that sense, we kind of blended this, because we have full authorship on the process of design. The passion is still in there. Let's say the design decisions is still in there. And we bring it as a final product that other clients are sort of coming to purchase it and
so you
take it
decided
as
to
an
be your own
product.
client.
Yeah.
So throughout history, there have been so many examples of nations using design as means to express their advancement, their sophistication, to either brand or rebrand themselves. However, in order for any nation to do that successfully, design cannot be shelved as a standalone field. but it must become part of our everyday. So design needs to be expressed in the objects and the rituals of everyday people, seeing it on the streets, hearing it in conversations. So for societies that want to start integrating design in their strategic foundation, where do they start and how do they sustain it?
Well, that's actually also a very good question. I think the big challenge is to the moment when you introduce design appreciation and a good taste for design within the general public, this is when you really start to elevate the entire design discipline in society and take advantage of it. Though that's the most challenging thing to do, especially when we are talking in our region that design and the current definition of it is rather new if we compare it to Europe, for example. Of course, we had design integrated in our culture, in our Islamic traditions, but let's say design education and the formation of the sort of contemporary graphic designer or industrial designer, any discipline of design is rather new, and that definitely reflects itself on the general public taste and appreciation and understanding of design. And to me, of course, being between the Netherlands and between the Arab world, I can see the shift very clearly. Of course, one of the main difference, I think, as a practicing designer, looking at the Netherlands, for example, there is a general, better understanding of design. And that doesn't come out of nowhere. That comes out of years and years of design practice and existing design that made the general public understand design at a much higher level, and that makes the sort of the life of a designer much easier. So on a day-to-day level, I notice it with clients, comparing it with clients. Of course, the clients in the Netherlands sort of maybe gives you more hard time to hire you, and that's because of the knowledge as well, because they do their kind of recruiting for designers much more carefully. They really look much more critically at your portfolio, at your credentials, of what specific service you can do. But then once you are hired, you kind of are given a lot of more freedom, and there is a lot of more trust in your design. So from there comes more the value and understanding of the design process, and giving the design process more justice.
Right.
And it comes with it. And I think to integrate that, I think the best way is to invest in design criticism, actually. I think in the Arab world, the level of design criticism is very low, if not mediocre. And the moment we invest more in design criticism, whether that is through education or specific programs designed to design criticism, you will breed a generation of design journalists, design thinkers, design critics, and that will play a role in helping spread design better to the general public.
Right.
So for example, looking at our newspapers here in the Arab world, you find an art section in the newspaper. Maybe you find a culture section. You don't have a design section. I think none of the newspapers have really just a design section. While, for example, in the Netherlands, of course, you have a design section in the newspaper. Say you have in your daily newspaper a design section that already with proper design journalists or design specialized writers or design critics only focusing on design, that automatically will translate into, communicating design, talking about design, discussing design in a healthy way to the general public, and that will help sort of developing further, let's say, the design understanding.
We have representatives of Ministry of Culture here. That's a great idea. Yeah.
Speaking of ministries, I always think also that, why not have a ministry of design?
Right.
Because actually, it's such a needed discipline, and such a discipline that's integrated in society, that if you have a body, let's say, at the governmental level dedicated to design, that can sort of help support all the other ministries and all the other government entities in supporting with the design knowledge, supporting with the proper design consultation, and training key decision makers and non-designers actually at understanding the potential of design and guiding them through it. That would be sort of at the governmental level the best approach to sort of answer your question, how to integrate design sort of in society and spread it to the widest possible target group of designers.
I mean, speaking of the ministry and speaking of governments, who sets the platform for exploring new possibilities in the field of design? So accessible design, inclusive design. Is it the government? Is it you guys? Is it, or policy intervention? Or usually it's a byproduct of forward-thinking clients and designers?
That's very, and I think both actually. I think both. Traditionally, it happens that actually forward-thinking designers would do it because that's their job, that's their passion. They kind of find the challenge, they find the niche, they find something that they would like to improve. Basically, they identify a problem and dedicate their design skills and make a career out of solving that and developing it. When that is a success, sort of it gets supported further by the government. If there is support and it sort of sees the light and make actual tangible change. The other way is also, of course, the most ideal, when the government is really trying to set up policies and support design in a way. I think both are important. Maybe the ideal is when the government can sort of identify who are these fast, very driven, forward-thinking designers that are actually making sort of creative solutions that have impact on society, and support these, or take them as, I would say, as advisors in order to kind of set governmental policies that will help the overall design scene.
Let them lead the way. So let's talk about trends. We've been having a discussion about, or a conversation about this talk prior to today, and I expressed my dislike for the word trends. But surely we both agree that whether it is students, clients, or the general public, people use digital platforms like Pinterest and Instagram as a form of design research and inspiration. So from an educator's perspective, I find that quite problematic for so many different reasons. So do you agree, and what do you think about that?
I mean, of course, I think design education is super challenging now, very difficult, very different than when I was in design schools, and I find it very difficult for you guys, for design educators, just because I think design students now have so much access to information, but not in the good way, because again, the design process, you can't fast track it. You cannot. It's a process that needs its time. And this is exactly the problem. Like, sort of designers now need to create something. First thing, I go on Pinterest and I see a million solutions for the same problem.
Exactly.
And it's sort of negative on two levels. Negative in the sense, again, that you are looking at other solutions immediately and you're not going through the process. And negative in the sense that it kind of makes a young designer feels down, because you see immediately sort of the best solution for the same problem. I mean, to me, of course, it's something we face also as practicing designers now. And to me, the focus has always been, again, to go back to basics, to go back to the basic of a design process. I'm liberated from all this. The last thing I want to do when I'm starting to design is look at Instagram, Pinterest, or any other thing. If I'm looking at anything, I'm looking at my design books, because that's, at least what's in a book is kind of more curated. It's coming with a little bit more research, and it's coming with a little bit more information, and it's not just the chaos that's around you without any validation or accurate sources. I think like young designers nowadays don't build a design library. I think these are part of the process. It's very important, going back to books, going back to the process. And again, substituting, when you are looking for inspiration, to me, I think it's even better to look at the digital collection of a museum, or going actually physically to a museum. That's as inspiring and a million times more efficient than looking at anything else, because there you see related elements to your design from different contexts. That's not just the end product. So now a young designer is asked to design a logo that has a tree as an element. And first thing they do is look at, a million solution of existing logos of trees.
Logos of trees.
And then you're seeing a million solutions. You almost have the feeling that everything is done and you're looking at the end result.
Right.
While, if you are going to the process, how we did it and how design education was in the first place, then your first thing is you're going to do at actual trees. You're going to go outside. You're going to document it in photos. You're going to look at artistic material that was done, whether it's etching, whether it's how our trees represented in paintings, how our different artists, not a design solution, not in a logo context, and then explore that material. You took a photo. Are you exploring it? Are you deconstructing it graphically? Are you photocopying it and resketching it? So, that answers your question about sort of the design process, to really focus on design process with needed time, which is conceptualizing, researching, sketching, and sketching again, and sketching again, and designing and redesigning, and then coming up for a end product that you're able to defend through a long process of design. And this kind of follows the notion that you mentioned about trends.
Right.
That's, again, when the goal is to follow the trend. Why does a trend, when the goal is to follow a trend, something is off?
Yeah.
Because why does something become a trend, actually? It becomes a trend because someone was thinking sort of in a different way, solving a solution, and came up with a solution that's fundamentally different and strong enough conceptually and visually that made it stand out, that made it so successful that everyone sort of wants to be the same.
Right.
But I think trend is by definition the end result of a successful project that's being imitated. At the end of the day, as a person doing branding, the last thing I want to do is actually to fall into a brand, into a trend. Because when I'm creating a brand, what I'm actually trying to do is to create a personality.
Exactly.
A personality for a product or an organization or an entity. And a personality needs to be different. Actually, in branding, I'm actually looking to stand out. I'm looking, even visually, I'm looking for that rare form. I'm not looking for that known for. I'm looking to something different visually, conceptually, that stands out from the crowd. And that is a big challenge actually for organization, because many people feel safer following the trend because they normalize trend as this is how the industry look, and that's not the case.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of brands, there's so many companies out there that have forged a path for themselves by not only putting innovative products out there, but actually placing design at the forefront, maybe setting themselves differently than the rest. From Olivetti in the early 1900s to Apple in our modern day. However, it's not necessarily a common practice. So why do you think that is? Is it due to possibly misconceptions about design and the value of design, or do you think it's possibly a lack of resources?
I think it relates to a little bit to the previous question. I think the core of it comes to lack of appreciation of design at the highest executive level, at decision level.
Yeah.
Because I think truly when you understand the power of design, then you're able to invest in design to be a main component in your company. And I think the facts tell that most of the biggest key players in brands have invested in design as their main element. Because design, at the end of the day, what is it doing? It is solving a problem, so making a product functional, but at the same time, making you want that product so much aesthetically, or by making it such a cool brand, or by making it so attractive. So actually that applies to any product. I think the problem of it is that what we elaborated on before, the lack of understanding of design at an executive level. For example, and I face this kind of practically. So even if you're looking at I don't know, let's say a product of a chicken food product, frozen chicken products in the market, which comes to us with the need of we want to rebrand, we want to really use design as a sort of pathway to make us grow and position ourselves differently. But at the end of the day, they're still limited by these trends because any over creative design will say, but the industry is not looking like this. We have to stay in the industry.
Right.
And then everybody stays sort of limited by this very narrow spectrum that has been defined over the years almost randomly.
Right.
And nobody dares to really place it completely outside. And actually, when someone does, that's what opens the way for, that's what creates a trend, and that's what others are trying to kind of like, oh, okay, but we can go this direction, and everybody's going to that direction. So I think it's lack of understanding, lack of gut and courage, of course, to do it. And I think at the end of the day, maybe it can be a fundamental problem in the process that a lot of time, like companies are going to designers, identifying the problem, identifying the creative brief.
Right.
So going at the end, placing the designers at the end of the process. My favorite way to work with client, and the one that has proved most successful actually in terms of results in sales and in products and in really elevating the, in really translating a strategy of design into practical sales and profit is when I work long term with a company. So it's not that a company would come to me and say, okay, we have this package, we need to package it. What do you suggest for us? Actually, it's no, I come on board, we work together for a year or two. I almost become part of the business day-to-day life and decision.
Right.
I understand what they do. I understand where the profit is, where the problem is, what the potential is, what the possibility is. And then as a designer, advise on what needs to be done.
Right.
So again, working together to define the creative brief rather than coming and executing a one specific task. I think that approach, kind of having the designer or design company or the creative director or the agency work with you, work as part of your team on the biggest picture.
Yeah.
That will help integrating design sort of as part of a company a culture, rather than just being stuck.
Right. I mean, that's a great idea for, or an example of putting design as a forefront. You mentioned something about design auditing, and I think that is possibly an idea of how you could very easily integrate design as part of your company values, but also put it in the forefront.
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what it is. Probably the started from a very tangible problem, and sort of the the cross-cultural injection of it was my own cross-cultural upbringing, which was limited first to me speaking Arabic and speaking English, grown up in the Arab world but educated in the West, and sort of injecting this into the work. Because at the end of the day, your practice as a designer is a reflection of your own personality, of
Right.
your own personal vision on the world, of your own point of view. Design is a point of view, and your point of view is shaped by all these aspects. And I think that that sort of reflected in the cross-cultural focus of work, and that grew eventually because I think like cross-cultural design is in really in definition is the ability of looking at designs from different perspectives.
Right.
You know, if I'm
Yeah.
designing a brand of a nation, as we did for Qatar, for example,
Yeah.
you kind of have to put different hats on. I'm the local looking at the brand. I'm the foreigner looking at the brand, and sort of this cross-cultural perspective is reflected when you yourself have been in different positioning, when you have been, you know, living inside out of a destination or looking at it from abroad. Um, and I think that developed over the year, and I think, you know, for every that sort of developed further my interest for me in discovering new cultures and traveling more, because that always applies to designs and reflect in design, and that's always sort of my advice for young designers.
Right.
I mean, I kind of collect my inspiration from the street. I walk on the street, and everything I see, from little hand-painted signs to texture to colors, this is the ingredients that I collect and that I use in my design practice. So walking in different streets, walking in different cultures, working in different countries is sort of different sources of inspiration. This is my Pinterest, going back to your
Yeah,
inspiration.
no, I was gonna say I'm gonna take this recording, play it over and over for the students.
So always almost my advice is for young designers, like, is to enrich sort of their cultural heritage, because design is really a manifestation of culture. And so my sort of advice is travel more, because actually when you travel, you are, for example, in the context of branding, you're placed in a new environment where all the brands around you are somehow new. So you're critically looking at it. So when I'm in a new place, the banks are different. The brands of the banks are different. The banks of the identity of the fast food chains are different. So it's almost
Right.
you're living in a parallel universe,
Yeah.
where as a consumer you're kind of seeing everything around you reinvented. But also another advice, like for young people, I say learn a new language.
Right.
That really has a tremendous input on your design perspective, because right, the language is again not only a language to communicate, but it's also an access to a different culture, an understanding of a different perspective. And again, along the years, you know, for me, building my 3 languages into 5 languages that I speak nourished tremendously the design studio's
Right.
cross-cultural perspective, not only because I speak these languages,
Yeah.
but it's a different perspective
Right.
again of it.
Opens new doors. So, we heard in the new strategy for creative industry launched by the Ministry of Culture and Youth, the aim is to increase the contribution of the sector to 5% of the national GDP over the next decade. Amazing. So that is obviously an indicator of the belief in the economic value that these fields put into the industry, but also it creates awareness amongst young people and existing entrepreneurs about potential of such fields. So being a designer that has worked across borders and across continents, what would you hope for this region's version of the creative industry?
I mean, it's quite a challenge, but it's also very inspiring to see sort of the governmental approach here and the support for design that you're having, and clearly, you know, we're seeing the shift in the Arab world of design center to be in the Gulf, to be particularly in Dubai, and that's quite exciting, and that's the first steps, I think, that needs to be done in terms of because the desire to support is there.
Right.
I always compare sort of the design scene to the design scene in the Netherlands, because I
Right.
think that the Holland, where I come from as well, is sort of one of the best examples where design is really integrated in society, in culture, in governmental support. And I think the best way relates a little bit to the questions we had earlier. Is I think it's about we probably we have to invest more in creating a fund to support stimulating design.
Yeah.
And that's something existing in the Netherlands. And I work with the Ministry of Culture and Education in the Design Fund, where the
Right.
Design Fund is already, it's actually creating budget across different disciplines of design, architecture, graphic design, social design, fashion design, you name it, like really well structured, and it opens the doors actually for forward-thinking designers to get their proposals, ask for a budget, and every proposal it is sort of evaluated by a committees of experts.
Right.
I think that will be sort of open the doors because a lot of the most interesting projects coming of the Netherlands are supported by the governmental funds, and these varies from small projects to larger size projects.
Right.
But it actually liberates designers from the need of working with clients, help stimulate designers to create projects that they think would work, particularly for designers who are not able to kind of navigate the corporate levels of finance, of the practical aspects of work, of getting their money and project approved. So it's sort of a fund judged by creative people, for creative people,
Right.
to support smaller scales project. And these, I think, can help inject, it's almost like injecting galleries in a city without a museum. You just invest in the smaller projects, self-initiated projects, to get the bigger picture rolling as well.
Right, very interesting. And speaking of investing in people, my favorite quote is, "The future is not inherited, it's created." So, what is the future of design or graphic design in education? And as educators, what do you think our roles should be? Being honest here, are we doing a good job? What our roles should
I think it's very difficult. I mean, it relates to all the challenges we spoke about today, from the fast pace of the world to the challenges of teaching young students the design process. All these are extremely difficult for design educator. Of course, the key question in design practice and in design education is to kind of forecast the future, to be able to adjust accordingly. I think it's very hard. I think you guys are, having a very difficult job. For me, yeah, I think like my probably advice and suggestion would be, particularly here, if I look at education here in the Arab world, design education in the Arab world, which has gone a long way.
Yeah.
But now is sort of in a position where it needs to exactly see how it moves forward, is to try to find a better balance of incorporating in education the practical aspect of the design. So have full-time educators kind of collaborate with full-time practicing designers to inject a little bit of both, because I think somehow you find with young graduating designer the lack of the knowledge of the real life work, which is normal actually, but I think that there needs to be a little bit of a balance, particularly to teach design students more things not related to design. Because nowadays I always say talent is not enough.
Right.
The world is so complicated that you need so much supportive skills and knowledge to be able to have your talent shine and to take the best out of your talent. And that's a tricky sort of equation to do, because you don't want to have in your design education too much practical work. You don't want to have only practicing designers teaching, because that would be more focused on actual kind of commercial outcome.
Right.
But at the same time, there is a problem when the majority of the education body in a design school is non-practicing designers, because then it makes a shift. So I think for the future, for here in the region, that's the biggest challenge. And of course, continuously injecting sort of the local appreciation and local integration in the curriculum, because of course before there was the challenge that most design courses were looking more at the West. Like students used to be better in sort of typography in Latin typography than Arabic typography, and that's just one example of the spectrum. I think this is more one of the challenges as well now.
Noted. So let's end it with this question, which I actually am very intrigued to hear what you think. But let's project ourselves into the year 2050 to forecast the design scene. This is around 30 years into the future. What are your hopes for the design scene globally? And I have another part to this question, but I'll wait for your answer first.
I mean, it's quite difficult. I mean, I think of it globally, but I think of it of the region, of course, because we are so, we're so rooted in our thinking here. It's quite difficult because if I think 30 years ago, like around, 1990, we did not have any design school in the region. The first, like, really graphic design school, aside from architecture. So the first graphic design school started 1990. It graduated their student around 1996 in UB in Lebanon, which was at the beginning sort of the center of like positioning itself at the center of design. And as I said, the design has moved forward eventually here to the Gulf and particularly to Dubai. So it's very difficult seeing those 30 years, how much they changed. Only on my discipline of work, only looking at typography and graphic design, it's almost, of course, impossible to project with the changes that are happening. Though I do think, of course, the focus of design will be more on environmental issues and real problems that we're going to be facing, particularly again here in the region. We are up to a very challenging future, environmental future as well, and really the look at sustainability in the design and how we are putting design skills and training a design generation to address such critical issues, that will certainly be the focus.
Interesting. I don't know if it would change your answer if I asked you what do you think or hope the role of the Gulf states would be in order to cultivate the design scene in the wider Arab world?
I mean, I think that's mainly it, and that's probably a good question that sums up almost everything we did. So we talked about. So really more in investing in a design, in design in general, particularly as we mentioned in investing in design criticism, because that is going to help diffuse design understanding, appreciation, and taste into the general public. And also, as we mentioned, supporting, like funding, stimulating design by individual forward-thinking designers with visions, eventually to lead the way for contextualizing design in solving really serious problems that we're going to face, particularly on an environmental level.
It's quite a good ending. I'm very surprised we're on time. Thank you, Tariq. Thank you for this engaging conversation about the role of design and communication in the Arab world and globally, and within the region as the UAE that launched the National Culture and Creative Industry Strategy only recently. It was certainly an interesting talk about all of that perspectives. An established graphic designer like you. It would be interesting to know about your own perspective in that field, especially that you have a footing both here and in the West. So thank you again for allowing us to pick your brain. And thank you all for attending this talk. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I know there is no Q&A, but if anyone has any questions, you can stop us after Al-Anud or myself. I'm more than happy to engage in any questions.
Yeah, bombard him with questions later. All right, thank you, Tariq.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.